recently we've had this horrible Supreme Court ruling in the UK, and the summary is the Scottish government tried to make it so that they have quotas for men and women on public boards. So they wanted more women involved in politics, basically, which, whether you agree with quotas or not, is at least admirable that they want to increase women in politics. They said it included trans women. Then a hate group sued them. The hate group lost it in court. Then they appealed it, and they lost the appeal, and then it went to the Supreme Court, and then they won. And it was a total flip of what all the lower courts have said. The ruling is a complete mess. It's a complete disaster. It's against science, etc. Anyway, one of the core points in all of this is the Scottish government took it all the way to the Supreme Court too, obviously defending their position. And then as soon as they lost, they were like, oh, well, we're done. So they are partially responsible for removing trans people's rights in the whole of the UK. And part of how our legal system works is the only people who can appeal this Supreme Court ruling are the defendants, the Scottish government. And they could do, because unlike in the USA, the UK Supreme Court is not our highest court. It's our highest UK court, but there is one court that we are below, which is the European Court of Human Rights, or the European Court of Justice. So there's like one level above. And looking at previous trans rights cases that have made it to the European Court of Human Rights, we probably would have won there. There was multiple rulings in the last couple of years, including one just this year, which very strongly came down in the side of trans people and trans people's rights. And it's very likely that they would have ruled in our favour based on the right to privacy and the right to data protection. Because those things are very wrapped up in all human rights, and particularly in all of this trans rights stuff, because in order to police lots of the stuff that transphobes want to police, you have to violate people's privacy, and Europe actually has very strong privacy protections. Anyway, because the Scottish government gave up, that's it. Like, it's not going to go to the European Court of Human Rights. There's not going to be a final decision on it. And now in order for us to repeat that same ruling and take it all the way back, we'd have to start at the lower court again. And it'd be now much harder to get anything heard there if it was just repeating the same argument. So we'd need a new argument. And that would probably need to be something like a trans person or a trans woman is denied access to using the toilet at work, and then she would have to take that to court, and then it would have to go all the way up, and it would have to get all the way to the European Court of Human Rights, which is probably, realistically, what will happen. It will just take 5 years. However, one of the many criticisms that we have of the Supreme Court ruling is they explicitly denied any trans people being involved in the case at all. They allowed, multiple gender-critical hate groups to be involved in the case. They obviously allowed the Scottish government to be involved in the case because they were the defendants. And they obviously allowed For Women Scotland to be involved because they were the people suing. But they also allowed Sex Matters to be involved, and LGBT Alliance, and a bunch of other transphobic dickheads. But no trans people. They allowed one submission from Amnesty International, who aren't a trans organisation, they're just a general human rights organisation. And they weren't allowed to appear in person. They were just only allowed to write in. So they just dismissed all their arguments and didn't pay any attention to any of it. And that is clearly unjust. It's just crazy that they ruled taking away the rights of a whole group of people without a single member of that group of people being represented in that court at all in any way, other than indirectly through a general human rights organisation that wrote a letter. So, but there is another route to get this particular case, or this particular argument, overarching argument, to the European Court of Human Rights. So here we have UK's first trans judge appeals to European Court of Human Rights over Supreme Court ruling. Victoria McCloud brings action against UK for infringement of her human rights after ruling on biological sex. Okay, interesting. That sounds like it's completely opposite to all of what I've just explained to you. Well, there's a slightly different route in. Britain's first trans judge is taking the UK to the European Court of Human Rights over the Supreme Court's ruling. Their crappy summary, The Guardian's never that good. So the UK Supreme Court ruled that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act referred only to a biological woman. They didn't put that bit in quotes, but they should have done, because they haven't defined what a biological woman is, and they've implied to have defined it in a way that isn't actually in correlation with biology. Anyway, they should write birth sex here. They've ruled that the Equality Act referred only to birth sex, with subsequent guidance from the Equality Watchdog amounting to a blanket ban on trans people using toilets and other services. Pretty much just full stop, but particularly of the gender they identify as. Victoria McCloud, a retired judge, is appealing to the European Court of Human Rights to bring action against the UK for infringement of her Article 6 rights. So Article 8 is the one about privacy. You don't need to know all this. It's a bunch of legal stuff. But what is important is Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights guarantees the right to a fair trial in both criminal and civil matters. So she is actually arguing that trans people weren't given a fair trial. This wasn't a fair hearing because no trans people were allowed to be involved in it. Last year, she sought to join in the litigation in the Supreme Court case against the government, arguing that it would significantly affect legal protections for trans women, but she was rejected. So she was a trans person. She is a judge, an expert in this area, someone directly affected, someone who had the funding to be involved, and the Supreme Court said, no, you cannot be involved. And then they didn't, and it's not like they said because we've already got a bunch of other trans people involved. No, they just denied all trans people from being involved. So now she is arguing that that was unjust, and maybe this is an angle to get it to the Supreme Court. Not the Supreme Court, the European Court of Human Rights. So she says, the basis that the Supreme Court refused to hear me or my evidence to provide them with information about the impact on those trans people affected by the judgment and failed to give any reasons. Those are two basic premises of normal justice. There were protest groups speaking on behalf of women in this court case, on behalf of transphobes in this court case, not on behalf of women. But ordinary women were not actually represented as a whole. The disabled were not represented. And now we're seeing the Conservatives saying that trans people have got to use disabled toilets, which impacts the lives of disabled people. The impacts of all of this have not been dealt with. True. Obviously this ruling was just about trans people. They were the only people that the transphobes care about. They don't care about intersex people. They don't care about disabled people. They don't care about vulnerable women. They don't care about women who are misgendered, cis women who are misgendered. They don't care about any of that. They were just there to hurt trans people. However, those other groups are affected. I'm not saying, the real victims of this are the cis people. Not at all. Obviously, the main victims here are the trans people. But it doesn't really matter who the main victim is, because if this is harming disabled people, then disabled people should have been involved in the case as well. Victoria McCloud is right to argue that it was unfair that trans people weren't represented in this case that affects their rights, but also she's right to point out that it affects lots of cis women and lots of disabled people. And particularly the EHRC's guidance, which is horrific. Over the weekend, the Cabinet Office Minister, Pat McFadden, said it was a legal consequence that trans people would be banned from using the toilets of the gender they identify as. McCloud said that rather than resulting in clarity, the judgment and subsequent government and commission statement have brought chaos. There's chaos because we've got the Supreme Court saying one thing, we've got the government and the EHRC saying another thing, we've got planning rules that the last government set whereby inclusive bathrooms are supposed to be discouraged. Obviously the Supreme Court case is a total mess, but this is one, not the only one, but this is one, potential avenue to do something about it at a court higher than the Supreme Court. It's quite possible that this will go nowhere. It's quite possible that she'll lose her case. It's quite possible that she'll win her case, and they'll say, yes, you should have involved trans people, so next time you got to involve trans people. And then nothing about the case will be reversed. But you just don't know. And I think what this is good to see a trans person standing up and fighting for all of us, and to know that, like, maybe to some of you watching, the idea that she could skip ahead and go straight to the Supreme Court, I keep saying Supreme Court, go straight to the European Court of Human Rights with this legal argument based on the Article 6 right to a fair trial. Maybe you knew that. I didn't know that. I didn't even see that as an opening. And now to see her doing this, like, makes it clear there are a lot more legal routes and a lot more routes in general to fight back for trans people's rights than initially appears, like, obvious to you. So it might feel really crushing if you're a trans person who lives in the UK, that they've just, like, stripped away our rights. And especially as you see some organizations start to, like, try and ban us from public spaces. But this isn't the end. Like, as I was saying before last week, this is like the start. This is the start of the pushback now. And Victoria McCloud is one of the people doing that. She's not the only one. She might be one of the more high-profile people doing it. She might be having more access to the Supreme Court and the European Court of Human Rights than we do. But if she fails, that isn't the end of it either. There's inevitably, from this terrible ruling, there is going to be a whole bunch of cases that get to the European Court of Human Rights, and at least some of them are likely to go our way. So don't lose hope. Get hope from this kind of thing.